They called me Alpha King, ruler of the North. I commanded legions with a word. My power was absolute. Then my own brother, Gideon, smiled to my face and sold me to monsters, hunters, men who dealt in shifter pain. They stripped my power with silver chains that burned like acid. They threw me in a hidden cage deep in the frozen woods, broken, bleeding, waiting only for death. My kingdom was stolen. My life was over. Hope was a forgotten word. Then she found me, a slip of a girl named Ilara, human, living alone like a forest spirit. She saw not the beast, but the agony. With impossible courage, she risked everything. She brought me water. She tended my wounds with gentle hands. She broke the silver chain that held me. She saved my life. I swore a silent oath to her, a life that burned into my soul. Then I had to run, leaving my small savior behind. That was 12 years ago. 12 years of ice in my heart. 12 years carving a bloody path back to my throne. 12 years hunting for Gideon and searching for the ghost of a brave girl I never forgot. Tonight, I found her. Across a crowded clearing, I saw her. Older now, a woman, carrying a faint silver scar on her wrist and the undeniable scent of my fated mate. My brother thought he took everything. He has no idea what he truly unleashed. Retribution is coming. And the girl who saved me, I'm coming back for her too.
Chapter 1. Ice and Agony. That was the world now. 12 years ago, the world had been pine forests under a crisp moon, the warmth of the pack hall, the weight of the Alpha King's crown resting heavy but sure on my brow. I was Reese, ruler of the vast northern territories. My word was law. My strength was legend. My brother, Gideon, stood at my right hand, his smile quick, his loyalty seemingly absolute. He was older, yes, but the pack's magic had chosen me. Gideon had sworn fealty, and I, in my youthful arrogance, had believed him. The betrayal came not on a battlefield, but during a hunt on the disputed southern border, a hunt Gideon himself had suggested. We were tracking a rogue bear, deep in territory claimed by human hunters, known for their cruelty towards our kind. Gideon had led us into a narrow ravine, the scent of pine thick in the air. Then the trap sprang. Silver nets, heavy and cruel, dropped from the cliffs above. The burning metal seared my fur, my skin, robbing me of my strength, my both recoiling in agony. Through the haze of pain, I saw Gideon step back, his face no longer smiling, but a mask of cold, triumphant hatred. "The throne should have been mine, little brother," he spat, his voice dripping with years of hidden poison. "You were always too soft, too trusting." Then the hunters emerged from the trees. Humans. Their faces were grim, their eyes cold and empty. They carried heavy silver chains and barbed prods. They knew Gideon. They had planned this together. My own guards, loyal to me, fought back, but they were outnumbered, caught in the same silver trap. I watched helplessly as they were cut down, their dying howls echoing in the ravine. The hunters approached me, their leader grinning, showing yellowed teeth. "An Alpha King," he sneered, his voice rough. "Gideon said you were strong. You'll fetch a fine price." They dragged me from the nets, the silver burning deeper, stealing my consciousness. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was Gideon's face, watching as his king, his brother, was chained like an animal and dragged away. My reign was over. My life, I know, would soon follow. The ice and agony had begun.
Chapter 2. Consciousness returned in slow, agonizing waves. Pain was the first reality. A deep, searing burn pulsed through every nerve ending, a constant reminder of the silver that had stolen my strength and now held me captive. I opened my eyes to darkness, thick and cold. I tried to move, but heavy chains bound my wrists and ankles, secured to the damp stone wall behind me. The links were thick, forged with silver runes that actively suppressed my wolf, leaving me trapped in my weaker human form, shivering and vulnerable. The air was rank with the smell of old blood, unwashed bodies, and despair. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a slow, maddening rhythm. I was in a cage, a small, lightless cell carved from rock, likely deep underground or hidden within a remote mountain. This was where the hunters brought their prizes. This is where shifters came to die. Days bled into nights, marked only by the brief, terrifying intrusions of my captors. They came infrequently, their faces harsh and cruel in the flickering lantern light. Sometimes they brought food, scraps of moldy bread and rancid water barely fit for rats. Other times they came for sport. They would drag me from my cell, still chained, and force me into a small barred arena. They would prod me with silver-tipped spears, laughing as the metal burned my skin, mocking the Alpha King who could barely stand. They wanted to break me, to strip away not just my power, but my will. My body weakened. The meager food wasn't enough to sustain even a human, let alone an alpha wolf. The constant pain from the silver drained what little strength remained. But my spirit, though battered, refused to break. I clung to the memories of my reign, the faces of my loyal pack, the scent of the northern forests, and I clung to hatred. A burning, all-consuming hatred for Gideon, my brother, the architect of my agony. Vengeance became my reason to endure. I would survive this. I would escape, and I would make him pay. But survival became harder each day. The cold seeped into my bones. The pain became a constant companion. Hope began to feel like a distant, foolish dream. I was alone, forgotten, a king reduced to a broken animal in a cage. Despair began to whisper in the darkness, a seductive promise of release. Maybe death would be kinder than this slow, agonizing descent into nothingness. Just as the last flicker of my will began to fade, a sound reached me through the oppressive silence, a soft footstep, hesitant and light, just outside my cell door. Chapter 3. The footstep was so light, so out of place in this den of brutal men, that I thought I had imagined it. Perhaps a rat skittering in the darkness. But then it came again, closer this time, accompanied by the faint, hesitant scrape of something against the heavy wooden door of my cell. Someone was there. Not a guard. Their steps were heavy, confident. This was someone small, someone cautious, someone who shouldn't be here. A sliver of light appeared at the bottom of the door as it creaked open, just a few inches. An eye peered through the gap. It was wide, filled with a mixture of fear and profound curiosity. A child's eye. Then the door opened wider, and she slipped inside, pulling it almost closed behind her. She was a girl, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, thin and small for her age. She wore simple, homespun clothes that looked patched and worn, and her dark hair was a wild tangle around a pale, serious face. She moved with the quiet, wary grace of a forest creature, her bare feet making no sound on the cold stone floor. She clutched a small, flickering candle stub in one hand, its weak light pushing back the oppressive darkness just enough for me to see her properly. She saw me then, huddled against the back wall, chained and bleeding, and her eyes widened further. But it wasn't with disgust or terror, not the way the hunters looked at me. It was with a deep, heart-wrenching pity. She saw not the monster, but the suffering. She didn't speak. She simply stood there for a long moment, her gaze taking in the heavy silver chains, the raw, weeping burns they left on my skin, the filth and despair of my cage. Her small face tightened with a resolve that seemed far too old for her years. Then she moved forward, her steps slow and deliberate, as if approaching a wounded animal she didn't want to startle. She stopped just out of my reach and carefully placed the candle stub on the floor. Then she revealed what she had hidden in her other hand: a small cup of clean water and a piece of bread, not moldy, but fresh. It was a king's feast compared to what the hunters gave me. She pushed them gently across the floor towards me. I stared at the offering, then at her. Why? Why would a human child risk coming into this place? Why would she show kindness to a creature her kind hunted? Her simple act of compassion was a stark, bewildering contrast to the endless brutality I had endured. It was the first drop of warmth in an ocean of ice, and it cracked something deep inside my frozen heart. I didn't know who she was or why she was here, but in that moment she was the only light in my endless darkness.
Chapter 4. I watched the girl, Ilara, retreat silently back toward the door after leaving the food and water. My first instinct, honed by Gideon's betrayal and the hunter's cruelty, was suspicion. Was this another trick? A poisoned offering? It seemed impossible that anyone, let alone a small human child, could navigate this hidden fortress undetected. Yet her eyes, they held no malice, only a profound, quiet sorrow, as if she understood pain in a way no child should. My body screamed for the sustenance she offered. The scent of the fresh bread was dizzying, the sight of the clean water a torment to my parched throat. Pride warred with desperate need. I was an Alpha King, reduced to accepting charity from a human child in a dungeon. But the primal urge to survive, fueled now by the burning need for vengeance against Gideon, won out. With clumsy, chained hands, I reached for the cup. My fingers trembled so badly from weakness that I almost spilled the precious liquid. I drank greedily, the cool water soothing the raw ache in my throat. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. Then I reached for the bread, tearing off small pieces and forcing them down, my starved body protesting even as it craved the nourishment. Ilara watched me from the doorway, her expression unreadable in the flickering candlelight, her presence a silent vigil. As I ate, her gaze drifted to the heavy silver chains binding my wrists. She saw the raw red burns where the metal bit into my skin, saw the way even the slightest movement made me wince. A small frown creased her brow. She took a hesitant step back into the cell, her eyes fixed on the chains. She reached out a small, tentative finger and brushed it against one of the cold, heavy links, not touching me, just the metal. A faint hiss, like water on hot stone, sounded as the silver reacted to even that slight, innocent contact, a testament to its potent anti-shifter magic. She snatched her finger back, her eyes widening slightly, not in fear, but in understanding. She knew what these chains were. She knew what they did. How? Who was this child who moved through a hunter's den with the stealth of a shadow and recognized the tools of their trade? A silent question passed between us in that moment. She didn't know I was a king, and I didn't know how she existed in this hellhole. But we both recognized a fellow prisoner, trapped in different ways by the same darkness. She gave me a final solemn look, then slipped back out the door, pulling it almost shut, leaving me alone once more, but no longer entirely hopeless.
Chapter 5. She came back the next night, and the night after that. Elara moved through the hunter's fortress like a wisp of smoke, her timing impeccable, her presence seemingly unnoticed. Each time, she brought small offerings, a piece of dried fruit, a chunk of cheese likely stolen from the hunter's stores, always clean water. It was barely enough to sustain me, but it was far more than the hunters provided. More importantly, it was sustenance for my spirit. Her quiet, consistent acts of kindness were a defiant light against the overwhelming darkness. I began to anticipate her arrivals, my ears straining for the sound of her soft footstep in the otherwise silent corridor. Her presence was a brief, precious reprieve from the endless cycle of pain and despair. We rarely spoke. Words felt loud and dangerous in that place. Instead, we communicated through shared glances, through the simple act of her offering and my acceptance. I learned to read the subtle shifts in her expression, the flicker of fear when a guard walked nearby, the quiet determination when she looked at my chains. It was the chains that drew her attention most. She seemed to understand, with an intuition that belied her age, that they were the source of my deepest suffering. The silver didn't just bind my body, it poisoned my spirit, weakening me day by day, suppressing the very essence of my wolf. One night, after leaving the usual water and bread, she didn't retreat immediately. Instead, she knelt near my chained wrist, her small brow furrowed in concentration. From the folds of her one dress, she produced something small and dark, a piece of rough, sturdy leather. Then, incredibly, she pulled out a small, flat stone she must have found outside. Keeping a cautious distance from my skin, she began to saw at the thick iron ring securing the chain to the wall. It was a ludicrous, impossible task. The iron was thick, ancient. Her small stone barely made a scratch. Yet she worked with a quiet, fierce determination, her small hands moving rhythmically, her breath misting in the cold air. I watched her, a profound, aching mixture of awe and terror filling my chest. She wasn't just bringing me food, she was trying to free me. This small, fragile human girl was risking her life, defying the hunters who surely ruled her existence for a creature she didn't even know. The sheer selfless bravery of it was staggering. I wanted to tell her to stop, to save herself, that it was too dangerous. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, a part of me, the part that still clung to the desperate hope of vengeance and survival, needed her to try.
Chapter 6. Night after night, Elara returned. The hunters remained oblivious, their arrogance blinding them to the small ghost moving through their fortress. My strength slowly began to return, thanks to the scraps she brought me. The bread and cheese didn't heal the silver burns, but they kept the deepest edge of starvation at bay. They kept the flame of vengeance alive. Each visit ended the same way. Elara kneeling near my chained wrist, patiently sawing at the thick iron ring with her small stone and piece of leather. It was a task that should have taken a mastersmith days, if not weeks. For a child with rudimentary tools, it was a near impossibility. Yet, she persisted. The rhythmic scraping sound became a strange sort of comfort, a testament to her unwavering resolve. I watched her work, my heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Guilt gnawed at me. I was allowing this child to risk torture and death for me. Every time a guard walked past in the corridor outside, my own fear spiked, not for myself, but for her. If she were caught, the thought was unbearable. Yet I couldn't bring myself to tell her to stop. Because, incredibly, impossibly, she was making progress. After maybe a week of her tireless efforts, a faint groove began to appear in the thick iron. It was minuscule, barely visible in the flickering candlelight, but it was there. She hadn't broken through, but she had marked it. She had wounded the metal that held me. Seeing that tiny line, that small victory against impossible odds, reignited a spark of hope I thought had died long ago. Maybe escape wasn't just a fantasy. One night, she arrived with a new determination in her eyes. Along with the usual water and bread, she carried something else. A small, rough file. likely stolen from the hunter's workshop or forge. It was a crude tool, rusted and worn, but compared to her stone, it was a weapon of immense power. Her eyes met mine across the small space, and a silent understanding passed between us. Tonight was different. Tonight, she believed she could break the chain. She knelt again, positioning the file in the groove she had painstakingly created. She wrapped the leather around the metal for grip and began to work, her small arms moving back and forth with surprising strength. The sound was different now. Not just a scrape, but a higher-pitched, more effective shink, shink, shink as the file bit into the iron. Hope, fierce and dangerous, surged through me. Freedom felt closer than it had in months.
Chapter 7. The grating sound of the file against the iron ring was deafening in the otherwise silent cell. Each stroke felt like a lifetime, echoing the frantic beat of my own heart. Ilara worked with tireless focus, her small face set in concentration, sweat beading on her forehead despite the damp chill of the cell. She paused occasionally to wipe her brow or blow away the fine metal dust, her breath misting in the air before resuming her relentless task. Hours seemed to pass. My muscles ached from holding my wrist in position, the silver chain radiating a constant, dull burn against my skin. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Her hope had become my hope. Her determination mirrored my own desperate need for freedom. We were bound together in this dangerous, silent conspiracy. Suddenly, a heavy footstep sounded in the corridor outside. Closer than usual. Ilara froze, her eyes wide with terror. She instantly dropped the file and scrambled back, kicking the small candle stub deeper into the shadows, plunging the cell into near total darkness. She pressed herself flat against the far wall, trying to disappear into the stone. My own heart leapt into my throat. Had they heard her? Had her luck finally run out? The footsteps stopped directly outside my cell door. A rough voice muttered something, followed by the clanging sound of a heavy key turning in a lock I hadn't known was there. The door scraped open, and the blinding glare of a lantern flooded the cell. A hunter stood, silhouetted in the doorway, his face obscured by the light, his bulk filling the frame. His gaze swept the small space, lingering on the meager cup and crust of bread near the wall. Ilara's offerings. He grunted, seemingly satisfied that I was still secure and alive, if barely. He kicked the cup, sending the last drops of water splashing against the stone. "Still breathing, beast," he sneered, though he didn't step inside. He clearly had no desire to get close, even with me chained. He shone the lantern directly on my face, and I closed my eyes against the glare, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, he seemed to lose interest. He spat on the floor, just inside the cell, muttered a curse, and slammed the heavy door shut. The key turned again, the sound echoing with grim finality. Silence returned, deeper and more terrifying than before. Had he seen her? Had he noticed the file? We waited, barely breathing, straining to hear any further sound. But there was only the distant, indifferent drip of water. He was gone. Ilara remained frozen against the wall, a small statue carved from shadow, until the last echo of his footsteps faded away.
Chapter 8. The silence that descended after the hunter left was thick with fear. Ilara remained pressed against the wall for a long time, barely breathing, a small shadow swallowed by the darkness. I could feel her terror radiating across the small space, a frantic, silent vibration. She must have thought she was caught, that her small act of rebellion was about to end in unimaginable pain. My own heart ached for her, this impossibly brave child who risked so much for a stranger. Slowly, cautiously, she pushed herself away from the wall. Her small hands were shaking violently. She crept back to where the candle stub lay and fumbled to relight it with trembling fingers. The weak flame flickered back to life, casting dancing shadows that made the small cell feel even more menacing. She looked at me, her eyes wide and dark, reflecting the tiny flame. I saw the question in them. Did he see? Are we safe? I gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of my head. He hadn't seen her. He hadn't noticed the file. His arrogance and disdain had made him careless. We were safe. For now. But the close call had changed everything. The delicate balance of our secret arrangement had been shattered. It was only a matter of time before someone else came, someone more observant, someone crueler. Time was running out. Ilara seemed to understand this too. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a renewed, almost desperate urgency. She retrieved the file, her small face set with grim determination. She didn't hesitate. She knelt back down by my wrist and resumed her work, sawing at the iron ring with a frantic energy she hadn't possessed before. The shink, shink, shink of the file was faster now, more ragged, fueled by the adrenaline of her near discovery. I watched her, my own sense of urgency mirroring hers. We couldn't afford another close call. Freedom had to be tonight. The groove in the iron was deeper now, a significant wound in the metal. The file snagged, grated, whined in protest, but it held. Metal dust glittered in the candlelight. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Each rasp of the file a prayer against the crushing weight of the silence outside. Then, with a sudden, sharp snap, the sound echoed like a gunshot in the small cell. Ilara gasped and fell back, dropping the file. I looked down. The iron ring, the symbol of my captivity, was broken. One side hung loose, severed by the relentless efforts of a small girl with a stolen file. My wrist was free. The first step towards vengeance had been taken, not by my own strength, but by the impossible courage of a human child.
Chapter 9. Freedom. The concept was so foreign, so utterly absent from my reality for months, that this simple fact of my wrist being unbound felt like a physical shock. I stared at the broken iron ring hanging loose from the silver chain, then at the raw, burned skin of my wrist beneath. It was real. I flexed my fingers, wincing at the stiffness, at the searing pain where the silver had rested, but the movement itself was a miracle. Hope, raw and fierce, surged through me, momentarily eclipsing the pain. I looked at Ilara. She sat back on her heels, breathing heavily, her small face smudged with grime and metal dust, the broken file lying on the floor beside her. She looked utterly exhausted, her small arms trembling from the effort. But her eyes, fixed on my freed wrist, shone with a triumphant, brilliant light in the dim candlelight. She had done it! This impossible child had achieved what I, in my weakened state, could not. My throat felt thick with an emotion I couldn't name, gratitude so profound it was painful, awe at her courage, and a fierce protective instinct that roared to life within me. "Ilara," I breathed, my voice rough and raspy from disuse and dehydration. It was the first time I had spoken her name. She looked up at me, her expression startled, then softening into a small, shy smile. It was the first time I had seen her smile. It transformed her serious little face, revealing the child beneath the wary survivor. But the moment was fleeting. We both knew this was only the first step. The heavy silver chain still snaked down from the broken ring to the shackle on my ankle. My other wrist remained bound to the wall by an identical setup. One hand free was a miracle, but it wasn't freedom. Not yet. Without a word, Ilara picked up the file again. She didn't pause to rest. She didn't celebrate her victory. She simply crawled over to my other wrist and positioned the file in the slight indentation where the silver cuff met the iron ring. The shink, shank, shank began anew, faster this time, more desperate. We both knew the borrowed time was running out. Another guard might come. The hunter might return. Every second was a gamble. I held my breath, listening to the rasp of the file, the only sound besides the distant, indifferent drip of water, praying to a goddess I wasn't sure existed anymore that this child's bravery would be enough.
Chapter 10. The second ring proved more stubborn than the first. Perhaps it was thicker. Perhaps the angle was more awkward. But Alara's progress felt agonizingly slow. The shink, shink, shink of the file was a tiny, desperate sound against the oppressive silence of the fortress. My newly freed hand rested uselessly in my lap, the silver chain attached to it still connected to my ankle, limiting my movement. I could only watch, my muscles tensed, my ears straining for any sound from the corridor. Alara's breathing grew heavy with exertion. Her small shoulders slumped, and her movements became less precise. She was tiring. Doubt began to creep back into my mind, a cold counterpoint to the surge of hope I had felt moments before. What if she couldn't do it? What if the file broke? What if another guard came before she finished? As if summoned by my fears, a faint sound echoed from the corridor. Distant shouts, heavier footsteps than usual. Not just one guard, but several, their voices sharp with alarm. My blood ran cold. Alara froze, her head snapping up, her eyes wide with panic. They weren't just passing by. They were searching for something. Or someone. "They know," I breathed, the words a cold certainty. "They know you're here." Terror, stark and absolute, flashed across Alara's face. She dropped the file, scrambling backward, looking for a place to hide in the small, bare cell. But there was nowhere. The footsteps were getting closer, the voices louder. They were coming this way. In that split second, a fierce, protective instinct, stronger than any fear for myself, surged through me. I couldn't let them take her. I couldn't let them hurt her. She had risked everything for me. Using my one free hand and leveraging my body against the wall, I lunged forward, grabbing the front of her worn tunic. With a strength born of pure desperation, I pulled her behind me, shoving her into the small, shadowed space between my back and the cold stone wall. "Stay silent," I hissed, hoping my own larger form could conceal her slight frame from a cursory glance. The key scraped in the lock again. The heavy door swung open, flooding the cell with the harsh glare of multiple lanterns. 3 hunters stood there this time, their faces grim, their eyes scanning the cell with a new suspicious intensity. One of them held the tattered remains of a small leather pouch. My heart stopped. It was the pouch Alara had used to carry the bread and cheese. They had found it. They knew someone had been visiting me.
Chapter 11. The lead hunter, a burly man with a cruel scar splitting his lip, stepped fully into the cell. His eyes, cold and sharp, swept over the space, lingering on the broken iron ring hanging from my chain, then snapping to my face. He held up the tattered leather pouch Alara had dropped in the corridor. "Look what we found, beast," he sneered. "Seems you've had a little visitor. A rat been sneaking you treats?" I met his gaze, forcing my face into a mask of cold indifference, channeling the icy control I had learned as king. Behind me, pressed against the wall, I could feel the frantic, terrified trembling of the small girl hitting there. Her fear was a tangible thing, a sharp scent in the air that the hunters, even in human form, might sense if they got closer. I had to keep their attention focused solely on me. "Your food is barely fit for rats," I replied, my voice a low, gravelly rasp. Perhaps one felt pity. The hunter chuckled, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Pity for you?" He took another step closer, his eyes narrowing as he took in my freed wrist, the faint metallic dust on the floor near the wall. His gaze sharpened with suspicion. "Or maybe your little rat brought you a toy." He gestured toward my freed hand. "How did that happen, Alpha King? Did the iron suddenly grow weak?" His 2 companions fanned out slightly, their hands resting on the hilts of the silvered knives at their belts. They were closing in, their suspicion turning into a dangerous certainty. I needed to create a diversion, something to make them forget about the pouch, about the possibility of an accomplice. I shifted my weight, deliberately rattling the heavy chain still connecting my free wrist to my ankle shackle. It was a risky move, drawing attention to my partial freedom, but it was the only weapon I had. "Perhaps your chains are not as strong as your arrogance," I snarled, injecting every ounce of my weakened alpha power into the words, letting a flicker of the true king show through the broken prisoner. The lead hunter flinched back instinctively, momentarily cowed by the unexpected flash of authority in my voice. His surprise was exactly what I needed. In that brief second of hesitation, I gathered my strength and slammed my bound ankle hard against the stone floor, sending a jolt of pain up my leg, but creating a loud, echoing clang. It was a desperate, almost suicidal act of defiance, designed to provoke, to enrage, to make them forget everything but the beast they thought they had broken. It worked. The hunter's surprise turned instantly to fury. "Insolent dog!" he roared, lunging forward, his focus entirely on me, forgetting all about the mysterious visitor.
Chapter 12. The hunter's roar filled the small cell. He lunged, not with a weapon, but with his fists, aiming a brutal blow at my head. Even weakened, my instincts were faster. I twisted away, the punch glancing off my shoulder, sending a jolt of pain through my already battered body. The silver chain hampered my movement, tethering me like a staked animal. Behind me, I felt Alara shrink further into the shadows, barely daring to breathe. The other two hunters moved in, their expressions grim. They drew their silvered knives, the polished metal gleaming wickedly in the lantern light. The lead hunter stumbled back, rubbing his bruised knuckles, his eyes narrowed with murderous intent. "Hold him," he snarled at his companions. "Seems the Alpha King needs another lesson in obedience. Let's see how much fight he has left when we bleed him again." The two hunters advanced, knives held low. I braced myself, planting my feet as best I could, the chains restricting my stance. I had no illusions about winning. My goal was singular. Keep their attention focused on me, keep them away from the corner where Alara hid, and buy her whatever precious seconds I could. I met their advance with a low growl, baring my teeth, playing the part of the cornered beast they expected me to be. One lunged, aiming a slash at my legs. I kicked out, my bare foot connecting solidly with his knee, sending him stumbling back with a grunt of pain. And the other tried to circle around me, to get behind me. That was the real danger. If he got too close to the back wall, he would find Alara. Using the momentum of his failed attack, I pivoted, deliberately putting myself between him and the corner where she hid, exposing my back to the lead hunter, but shielding her from view. It was a foolish, reckless move, leaving me vulnerable. The lead hunter saw his chance. He surged forward again, not with his fists this time, but with a short, heavy silver rod he pulled from his belt, a tool designed specifically to inflict maximum pain on shifters. He swung it in a vicious arc aimed at my head. I threw up my bound arm to block, the silver rod connecting with the iron ring on my wrist with a sickening clang. Sparks flew. The force of the blow sent a shockwave of agony through my arm, but the iron ring, already weakened by Alara's filing, held. More importantly, the impact averted the blow from my head. I staggered back, using the momentum to slam my shoulder against the hunter who had tried to circle behind me, knocking him off balance. In the chaos, their focus remained entirely on subduing me. No one had noticed the small shadow hidden behind the beast. For now, Alara was still safe.
Chapter 13. The clang of silver hitting iron echoed in the small cell. The hunter who had swung the rod stared in disbelief at the sparks, momentarily stunned that his blow hadn't shattered my arm. His pause was brief, but it was enough. I lashed out again with my foot, aiming for his gut this time, forcing him back another step. The two hunters with knives pressed forward, trying to pin me against the wall. Pain radiated from my arm where the silver rod had connected, a deep, burning ache that resonated through my bones. My weakened body screamed in protest. Every movement was an effort, every breath shallow. But the sight of Alara's terrified eyes, barely visible in the shadows behind me, fueled a strength I didn't know I still possessed. I could not let them reach her. I focused on defense, using the limited reach afforded by my chains to parry their clumsy knife thrusts. My partially freed left hand was a small advantage, allowing me a slightly wider range of motion, but the heavy chain still connected to my ankle kept me anchored, preventing any real evasion. I deflected a slash aimed at my chest, the silver blade slicing through the air where I had been a split second before. Another knife grazed my side, drawing a sharp hiss of pain, but the wound was shallow. They were toying with me, enjoying the struggle, confident in their numbers and their silver weapons. The lead hunter circled, the silver rod held ready, waiting for an opening. "Getting tired, King?" he taunted, his scarred lip curling. "Not so mighty without your pack, are you?" He was right. I was tiring. My vision began to blur at the edges. The silver poisoning, exacerbated by the exertion, was dragging me down. I stumbled, catching myself against the rough stone wall. This was it. They were closing in. The hunter with the rod saw his chance and moved forward, raising it for a final, crippling blow. Suddenly, a small, dark object flew from the shadows behind me. It struck the lead hunter squarely on the side of the head with surprising force. It was the rusted file Alara had used. She had thrown it with all her might. It wasn't enough to seriously injure him, but the shock of the unexpected projectile made him stagger back, his swing going wide. His head snapped towards the corner where Alara hid, his eyes widening in enraged surprise. "A rat! You did have a rat!" He forgot about me entirely, his fury now focused on the small, hidden figure who had dared to interfere. He started to turn, to move toward Alara, but in that moment, his focus diverted. He made a fatal mistake. He forgot about the beast.
Chapter 14. The hunter's momentary distraction was all I needed. Rage, cold, and absolute surged through me, momentarily burning away the pain and exhaustion. He had threatened Alara. He had turned his vile attention toward the child who had shown me kindness. That I could not allow. With a roar that was pure primal wolf, I threw myself forward. The heavy chain connecting my free wrist to my ankle snapped taut, limiting my reach, but it gave me an anchor. I used my free hand, balled into a fist, and slammed it into the side of the lead hunter's head, the same spot Alara's file had struck. The impact wasn't strong enough to knock him out, not in my weakened state, but it was enough to send him staggering sideways, his roar of rage turning into a grunt of surprise and pain. He stumbled directly into the path of one of his companions, the one with the knife raised to strike me. They collided heavily, a tangle of limbs and curses. The third hunter, momentarily confused by the sudden chaos, hesitated. I didn't wait. I couldn't afford to. I lunged again, this time at the hunter closest to Alara's hiding spot. I ignored his knife, focusing only on creating distance. I slammed my shoulder into his chest, using my body weight to drive him backward, away from her. He stumbled, surprised by the force of my attack, giving me a precious second. Behind me, I heard a small, determined gasp. Alara wasn't just hiding anymore. Seeing the hunters turn on me, seeing me fight back despite the chains, had ignited her own fierce spirit. While the hunters were momentarily off balance, she darted from her hiding spot. She didn't run for the door. She ran toward the wall, where my other wrist was still chained. She snatched up the fallen file. Her movements were frantic now, fueled by terror and a desperate need to help. The shink, shink, shink started again, faster, more ragged than ever before, a tiny, defiant sound against the backdrop of the hunters regrouping. The lead hunter recovered, shaking his head to clear it. His eyes, burning with hatred, found me again. But then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal coming from behind me. He glanced past me, saw the small girl frantically working on my remaining chain, and a look of dawning, furious understanding crossed his face. "Kill the brat first!" he bellowed, finally realizing the true source of the threat. He raised his silver rod, preparing to charge past me, but he had wasted too much time. Alara's desperate gamble was about to pay off.
Chapter 15. The hunter bellowed, his face twisted with rage, and charged straight past me, the silver rod held high like a club. His target was the small, determined figure sawing frantically at my chain. Alara flinched but didn't stop, her eyes squeezed shut, bracing for the blow. He would never reach her. Even with one wrist and both ankles still bound by heavy chains, the Alpha King within me surged. I roared, a sound of pure, untamed fury that momentarily stunned the other two hunters. Using the wall for leverage, I threw myself sideways, intercepting the lead hunter's charge. My shoulder slammed into his side with the force of a battering ram. He grunted, knocked off course, stumbling away from Alara. He recovered quickly, whirling on me, his eyes blazing. "You'll die protecting the brat," he snarled, swinging the silver rod again. I dodged, the rod whistling past my ear, close enough for the burning proximity of the silver to make my skin crawl. The other two hunters, seeing their leader engaged, pressed their attack on me, their knives flashing. It was chaos, a desperate 3-on-1 battle in a tiny stone cell. I was hampered by the chains, weakened by silver, but fueled by a protective rage I hadn't felt in years. I fought like a cornered wolf, using my size and remaining strength to block, shove, and kick, keeping them focused entirely on me, keeping them away from Alara. Every clash, every grunt, every clang of metal echoed in the small space. And through it all, like a frantic heartbeat beneath the violence, was the shink, shink, shink of Alara's file. She hadn't stopped. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the grime and metal dust, but her small hands kept moving, sawing desperately at the iron ring. She knew, with the simple, profound clarity of a child, that my freedom was her only hope. I blocked another knife thrust, the silver blade slicing my forearm. Pain flared, hot and sharp, but I ignored it. I shoved the hunter back, creating a precious second of space. The lead hunter swung his rod again, aiming for my head. I ducked, letting the blow slam into the stone wall behind me, sending chips of rock flying. Then came the sound I had been praying for, a sharp, high-pitched snap. Alara cried out, falling back as the second iron ring broke apart. My right wrist was free. A surge of raw, primal power flooded through me as the direct contact with the silver shackle was broken. The oppressive weight on my wolf lessened instantly. I might still be chained at the ankles, but my hands were free. The fight was about to change.
Chapter 16. The snap of the second iron ring breaking was like a thunderclap in the small cell. A wave of raw, untamed power surged through me, a feeling I hadn't experienced since before Gideon's betrayal. The constant, agonizing drain of the silver shackles was drastically reduced. While my ankles remained bound, freeing my hands unleashed a significant portion of my alpha strength. The wolf within me roared, no longer suppressed, but straining against the remaining chains, demanding release, demanding vengeance. The hunters felt the shift immediately. The air in the cell grew thick, heavy with my power. The lead hunter, who'd been lunging forward, stopped dead, his eyes widening in sudden primal fear. He stared at my now free hands, up to broken iron rings hanging uselessly from the silver chain still attached to my ankles. He saw the shift in my eyes, the cold, predatory light that replaced the desperate defense. He saw the Alpha King beginning to surface. "Finish him!" he shrieked at his companions, his voice laced with panic. "Now!" But it was too late. I moved. Even with my ankles chained, my speed and strength were exponentially greater than before. When the nearest hunter lunged with his knife, I didn't just block, I caught his wrist in an iron grip. He cried out as bones crunched. I twisted, using his momentum against him, and slammed him bodily into the other knife-wielding hunter. They collapsed in a tangled heap. The lead hunter scrambled backward, his earlier confidence completely gone. He swung the silver rod wildly, a desperate attempt to keep me at bay. I ignored the searing proximity of the metal. I grabbed the rod mid-swing, my palm blistering on contact, but my grip held. He tried to pull it back, his eyes wide with terror, but he was no match for my alpha strength. With a snarl, I ripped the rod from his grasp and threw it clattering into the far corner. He was disarmed, his companions momentarily incapacitated. Fear rolled off him in waves. He fumbled at his belt, drawing a short, cruelly curved silver knife, his last resort. Behind me, Ilar had scrambled back to the relative safety of the corner, her eyes wide as she watched the predator she had unleashed. I advanced on the lead hunter, the heavy chains dragging slightly at my ankles, but no longer truly hindering me. He held the knife defensively, his hand shaking. He knew he was facing not just a shifter, but an alpha king fueled by months of agony and a burning need for retribution. "Stay back, beast," he stammered. I gave him a cold, feral smile, letting my fangs lengthen slightly. Vengeance was about to begin.
Chapter 17. The hunter held the silver knife like a talisman against death, his knuckles white, his body trembling. He saw the predator in my eyes, the promise of pain, the culmination of months spent enduring his casual cruelty. He tried to muster a threat, a final snarl, but only a pathetic whimper escaped his lips. Pathetic. They were all pathetic without their silver in their numbers. My wolf urged me to tear him apart, to make him suffer as I had suffered, to break his bones, feel his terror, let his blood paint the walls of my cage. The rage was a physical thing, hot and demanding, threatening to consume me. But then my gaze flickered past the cowering hunter to the corner of the cell. Ilar. She was watching, her small face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. Awe, perhaps? Seeing her, seeing the innocent witness to my potential brutality, banked the fires of my rage slightly. I would have my vengeance, but I would not become the monster they believed me to be. Not in front of her. I moved with blinding speed. Before the hunter could react, I slammed my hand against his knife wrist, sending the silver blade clattering harmlessly across the stone floor. His cry of pain was cut short as my other hand closed around his throat, lifting him effortlessly off his feet. His eyes bulged, his hands clawed uselessly at my grip. I could feel the fragile bones beneath my fingers, could sense the frantic pounding of his heart. One clench and it would be over. But Ilara's presence stayed my hand. Instead of snapping his neck, I slammed him hard against the stone wall, his head connected with a sickening thud, and he slumped. Unconscious, but alive. I dropped him like a sack of garbage. The other two hunters, who had just untangled themselves, froze, witnessing their leader's swift defeat. They looked at me, at their fallen leader, and then at each other. Their will to fight evaporated. One of them scrambled backwards, dropping his knife and fumbling desperately at the locked cell door. The other simply stood paralyzed, shaking his head, mumbling, "Oh, no, no." I advanced on them slowly, letting the weight of my presence, the cold promise of pain in my eyes, do the work. The one fumbling at the door let out a choked sob and collapsed into a trembling heap. The other one dropped his knife as if it burned him and sank to his knees, his head bowed in absolute surrender. They were broken. My vengeance didn't need blood. Their terror was satisfying enough. For now. My gaze shifted to the heavy silver chains still binding my ankles. Ilara, understanding instantly, scrambled forward with the file.
Chapter 18. Ilara scrambled across the cold stone floor, the small, rusted file clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't hesitate, didn't look at the unconscious lead hunter slumped against the wall, or the two others trembling in surrender. Her focus was absolute, the heavy, silver shackles clamped around my ankles. She knelt, positioning the file against the thick iron loop connecting the shackle to the chain bolted into the floor. The rhythmic shink, shink, shink began again, a tiny, determined sound in the suddenly quiet cell. I stood guard over the two conscious hunters, my presence alone enough to keep them paralyzed with fear.
My body still thrummed with the residual power unleashed by freeing my hands, but the silver around my ankles was a constant draining poison. Every moment counted. Ilara worked with frantic speed, her small hands surprisingly steady despite the terror she must have felt. The metal dust flew, glittering faintly in the dim light. It felt like an eternity, but it must have only been minutes. The first iron loop snapped, the sound echoing loudly. Hope surged again. One more. She immediately moved to the other ankle, resuming her work. The hunter huddled near the door whimpered softly. I shot him a cold glare, and he fell silent, pressing himself further against the unyielding wood. The second loop took longer. The angle was awkward, and Ilara was clearly exhausted. Her movements slowed, her breathing becoming ragged. Doubt flickered. Could she do it? Could this small child truly break the final chain before someone else came? Before these hunters regained their nerve? Just as I was about to urge her to hurry, the file bit through the last sliver of iron. Snap! The final loop broke. I was free. The heavy silver chains fell away from my ankles with a clatter that sounded like music. For the first time in months, no silver touched my skin. Raw, untamed power flooded my system, my wolf roaring in triumph. The lingering weakness vanished, replaced by the full, potent strength of an alpha king. The silver burns on my wrists and ankles began to visibly heal, the raw flesh knitting itself closed at an accelerated rate. I took a deep, shuddering breath, reveling in the feeling of my own power returning. Then I turned to Ilara. She had slumped back against the wall, utterly spent, the file dropping from her nerveless fingers. Her eyes were closed, her small chest rising and falling rapidly. She had poured every ounce of her strength into freeing me. Gently, ignoring the terrified hunters, I knelt beside her. "Ilara," I murmured. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and exhausted, but holding a faint spark of relief. I reached out, my hand surprisingly steady, and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "You did it," I whispered, my voice thick with awe and gratitude. "You saved me." Now it was my turn to save her. Chapter 19. With my power fully restored, the remaining obstacles felt insignificant. The two conscious hunters were paralyzed by fear, offering no resistance. The heavy cell door, though locked from the outside, was trivial. I placed my hands on the thick ironwood and focused my strength. With a grating shriek of protesting metal, the lock mechanism shattered and the door sprang inward. Freedom lay before us. But first, Ilara. She was still slumped against the wall, utterly drained, her small body trembling with exhaustion and reaction. She had used every last bit of her strength and courage to free me. Now she looked like she might collapse. Gently, I scooped her into my arms. She was shockingly light, little more than skin and bone, yet she possessed a spirit stronger than any warrior I had ever known. She made a small sound, a sigh perhaps, and instinctively curled against my chest, seeking warmth and safety. The simple act of trust sent a fierce, protective surge through me. "Hold on," I murmured, my voice softer than I thought possible. I cradled her close, shielding her small form as best I could. Then, turning my gaze toward the terrified hunters still huddled in the cell, I let a flicker of my true alpha power wash over them, a cold, silent promise of agonizing death should they ever speak of what they had seen or harm another shifter again. Their eyes widened in mindless terror, and I knew they would obey. Leaving them locked in their fear, I stepped out into the dark, damp corridor, Ilara held securely in my arms. I moved swiftly and silently, my wolf senses guiding me through the labyrinthine passages of the hunter's fortress. This place, which had been my prison, now felt fragile, insignificant beneath my feet. I was no longer the prey. I was the predator, and this was my hunting ground. I encountered no guards. Either they were fools, confident in their silver chains, or the commotion in my cell had drawn them elsewhere. It didn't matter. Nothing in this fortress could stand against me now. I retraced the path Ilara must have taken, guided by the faint scent of her passage, a trail only an alpha could follow. Finally, I saw it, a small rusted grate near the floor, half hidden by shadows, leading to a narrow ventilation shaft. This must have been her secret entrance, her pathway through the belly of the beast. It was barely large enough for her small form, let alone mine. But beyond it lay the scent of fresh, cold night air. Beyond it lay freedom.
Chapter 20. The ventilation shaft was impossibly small, clearly meant for airflow, not passage. Looking down at the sleeping child in my arms, then back at the narrow opening, I knew I couldn't carry her through. Gently, reluctantly, I eased Ilara awake. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and confused in the dim corridor light. "Ilara," I whispered, keeping my voice low. "I need you to be brave for a little longer. Can you climb through here?" I pointed to the rusted grate. "This is your way out, isn't it?" She nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. She looked from the grate back to me, a flicker of fear returning. She didn't want to leave me. "I cannot fit," I explained softly, "but I will find another way. Go. Get out of this place. Run into the woods and hide until dawn. Do you understand?" She hesitated, her small hand reaching out to touch my arm, a silent plea. "I will find you," I promised, my voice fierce with conviction. "I swear it. No matter where you go, I will find you. Now, quickly." That promise, the certainty in my voice, seemed to give her the courage she needed. She slid from my arms and, with the agility of a small animal, pulled the grate aside and squeezed into the narrow, dark opening. She gave me one last look, her eyes wide and trusting, then disappeared into the shaft. I waited, holding my breath, until I heard the faint scraping sounds of her passage fade away, followed by the distant sound of the grate falling back into place on the outside. She was out. She was free. Now, it was my turn. Leaving Ilara's secret route undisturbed, I turned back into the fortress corridors. My wolf senses, fully awakened, guided me through the oppressive darkness. I moved with lethal silence, a shadow reclaiming its power. I needed to find the hunter's main exit, create a diversion, and ensure no one could follow Ilara. I found the central guard room near what felt like the main entrance tunnel. 3 hunters sat slumped around a table, gambling, oblivious to the fact that their prize captive was now loose. Their arrogance would be their undoing. I didn't give them a chance to react. I moved through the room like a phantom of death, striking with precise, disabling blows. They fell without a sound, unconscious but alive, for now. My priority was escape, not immediate vengeance. That would come later. With the guards neutralized, I found the heavy, iron-bound door that led outside. It was barred from the inside, a foolishly simple lock. With a surge of raw power, I tore the thick iron bar from its brackets and threw the door open. Cold, clean night air washed over me, carrying the scent of pine, damp earth, and freedom. I stepped out into the darkness, leaving the fortress of my agony behind me, my gaze already fixed on the dark woods where a small, brave girl was hiding.
Chapter 21. The cold night air was a balm on my skin, a stark contrast to the stale, damp chill of the hunter's fortress. For the first time in months I was truly free, standing under the vast, star-dusted sky, the scent of pine and wild earth filling my lungs. My wolf rejoiced, reveling in the sudden release, the return of its full power. But my focus was singular. Ilara. She was out here. Alone, a small child in a dark, dangerous forest. My promise echoed in my mind. I will find you. I shifted.
The transformation was swift, powerful, a rush of familiar magic knitting bone and sinew into the form of a massive wolf. My senses exploded outwards. The world became a symphony of scents, sounds, and subtle tracks invisible to human eyes. I lifted my head, tasting the wind filtering through the myriad smells of the forest, damp earth, decaying leaves, the distant musk of deer, until I found it, her scent. Faint, tinged with fear, but undeniably hers. It led away from the fortress, deeper into the dense woods. I ran. My paws devoured the ground, moving with the speed and silence no human could match. I followed her trail, a path marked by small, hurried footsteps and the lingering scent of her terror. She hadn't gone far, likely seeking the thickest cover she could find, just as I had instructed. The protective instinct roaring within me intensified with every stride. This child, this human girl, had done the impossible. She had faced down monsters and freed a king. Now it was my turn to be her shield. Her scent grew stronger, leading me towards a dense thicket of young fir trees, their branches interwoven like a natural wall. I slowed my pace, approaching cautiously, not wanting to frighten her further. My wolf senses told me she was inside, huddled small and still. I pushed my way gently through the low-hanging branches. She was there, curled into a tight ball at the base of a large tree, fast asleep. Exhaustion and the release from terror had finally claimed her. Her small face, smudged with dirt and tears, looked impossibly young and fragile in the faint moonlight filtering through the branches. The small rusted file lay beside her, dropped from her hand as sleep took her. A profound tenderness, an emotion I hadn't felt in decades, washed over me. This was the creature who had saved my life, who had shown me kindness when all others offered only cruelty. The life debt I owed her was absolute, but standing there watching her sleep, feeling the strange nascent pull of the fated bond I didn't yet understand, I knew it was already more than just a debt. She was important. She was mine to protect. Gently, careful not to wake her, I lay down beside her. My large wolf form a warm, living shield against the cold and the lingering shadows of the fortress.
Chapter 22. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale shades of gray and rose, the first light filtering through the dense canopy of the fir trees. I hadn't slept. My wolf senses remained on high alert, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of pursuit, any lingering scent of the hunters. But the woods remained quiet, peaceful. For now, we were safe. Ilnara stirred beside me, a soft sigh escaping her lips. She burrowed deeper into the thick fur of my flank, seeking warmth in her sleep. Her small hand, lying near my paw, still bore faint traces of metal dust from the file. Looking at her, so small and utterly trusting in the shadow of the beast she had freed, a fierce, almost painful protectiveness surged through me. Gideon's betrayal had taught me the poison of misplaced trust, the agony of vulnerability. Yet this child, this human, had shown me a different path. Courage born not of power, but of pure compassion. The life debt was a chain, binding my fate to hers, but the feeling stirring within me was more than obligation. It was a resonance, a deep, instinctual pull I hadn't felt since never. My wolf recognized something in her, something profound, something essential. Mate, the thought whispered again, confusing and insistent. It made no sense. She was human, a child. But the pull was undeniable, a current humming beneath the surface of my gratitude. The rising sun cast longer shadows, warning me that we couldn't stay here. The hunters, or Gideon's forces, would eventually track me. Staying near the fortress was dangerous, especially for Ilnara. Gently, I nudged her shoulder with my nose. Her eyes snapped open, wide with disorientation, then immediate fear as she found herself face to face with a massive wolf. She scrambled backward with a small cry. I whined softly, lowering my head, trying to convey reassurance, trying to remind her who I was. Recognition dawned slowly in her eyes, chasing away the terror. She saw the memory of the chained prisoner, the recipient of her kindness. "It's you," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Hesitantly, she reached out a small hand and placed it on my muzzle. Her touch was warm, unafraid. I closed my eyes, savoring the simple, trusting contact. I needed to speak to her, to reassure her properly. I pulled back slightly and shifted. The magic flowed, reshaping bone and sinew. And in moments I stood before her in my human form, pulling on the rough clothes I had taken from the unconscious hunters. Elnara watched the transformation, not with fear, but with wide-eyed fascination. "We have to go," I said softly, crouching down to her level. "It's not safe here. Will you come with me?"
Chapter 23. Ilara looked at me, her small face serious as she considered my question. She glanced back in the direction of the hunter's fortress, a flicker of fear crossing her features, then looked back at me, the man who had been a wolf just moments before. She knew instinctively that returning to whatever life she had known there was impossible. She had freed me, she was complicit. Staying meant certain death if the hunters discovered her role. Going with me meant venturing into an unknown, potentially dangerous future with a creature she barely understood. Yet there was no real hesitation in her eyes. The bond forged between us in the darkness of the cell, the trust she had shown me, it held fast. She gave a small, solemn nod. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I will come with you." Relief washed over me, swift and profound. I hadn't realized how much her answer meant, how terrified I was of leaving her behind again. "Good," I said, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "Stay close." I stood and surveyed our surroundings, my alpha senses assessing our immediate situation. We needed to put distance between ourselves and the fortress before the hunters organized a proper search, but Ilara was small, weak from probable malnutrition, and clearly exhausted. She couldn't travel far or fast on foot. "We need transport," I murmured, more to myself than to her. My gaze scanned the trees, the terrain. The hunters had likely kept horses nearby, but stealing one would leave an obvious trail. No, we needed something faster, something that wouldn't be easily tracked. My eyes landed on a narrow game trail leading further up the mountainside. My wolf knew these lands, even after 12 years. I remembered an old, abandoned watchtower about a mile higher up, a relic from a previous Alpha King's reign. It was strategically placed, rarely visited, and often used by my pack's scouts for shelter during long patrols. There might be supplies stashed there, perhaps even emergency communication equipment if the old enchantment still held. More importantly, it offered a temporary, defensible refuge where Ilara could rest for a short while. "This way," I said, gently taking her small hand. Her fingers felt tiny and fragile in my grasp. "There was a place nearby where we can rest safely for a short while. Can you walk a little further?" She nodded again, her small face set with determination. Together we left the small thicket that had been her hiding place and began the climb up the steep wooded slope, leaving the valley of my imprisonment behind us, taking the first tentative steps into our uncertain future.
Chapter 24. The climb was harder on Ilara than I had anticipated. The mile to the old watchtower was steep, the game trail overgrown and treacherous in places. Her small legs struggled to keep pace with my longer strides, even though I deliberately slowed my pace. She never complained, her small face set with a quiet determination that mirrored the resolve I had seen in the cell. But I could see the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the slight tremor in her limbs. She was running on pure will. Finally, through the dense trees, I saw it. The crumbling stone outline of the ancient watchtower, perched precariously on a rocky outcrop. It was barely more than a ruin. Its roof long since collapsed, but its thick stone walls still offered shelter and a commanding view of the surrounding forest. More importantly, it was isolated, forgotten, a perfect place to rest and regroup. "Almost there," I murmured, giving her small hand a gentle squeeze. We reached the base of the tower and found the old iron-bound door still intact, though heavily rusted. It took a considerable amount of my strength to force it open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was cold and damp, smelling of stone dust and old ashes. A rough stone hearth dominated one wall, and narrow arrow slits served as windows, offering panoramic views of the valley below. More importantly, it was isolated, forgotten, a perfect place to rest and regroup. As I had hoped, the scouts' emergency cache was still hidden beneath a loose flagstone near the hearth. Inside the oilskin-wrapped bundle were dried rations, a water skin, thankfully still full, a tinderbox, and a thick fur blanket. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Ilara sank onto the cold stone floor near the hearth, her small body finally succumbing to exhaustion. She looked utterly spent, her earlier bravery replaced by a child's weariness. My heart ached for her. This was no life for a child, fleeing monsters and sleeping in ruins. I quickly set about making the space more comfortable. I used the tinderbox to coax a small, hesitant flame to life in the hearth, feeding it dried twigs I gathered from just outside the door. The fire began to chase away the damp chill, casting a warm, flickering glow across the small space. I offered Ilara some of the dried meat and water, and she ate slowly, her eyes heavy-lidded. When she had finished, I wrapped the thick fur blanket around her small shoulders. She leaned back against the stone wall near the fire, her eyes drifting closed almost immediately. Within moments, she was asleep, her breathing deep and even. I watched her for a long time, the firelight softening the lines of her face, making her look even younger, more vulnerable. I owed her my life, my freedom, and I would protect hers with everything I had. But first, I needed to know who was hunting us and how close they might be.
Chapter 25. While Ilara slept, cocooned in the warmth of the fire and the fur blanket, I moved to the narrow arrow-slit window that faced back toward the valley and the hunter's fortress. My wolf senses, sharp and clear now without the dulling effect of silver, scanned the distance. The fortress itself was a dark scar on the landscape, showing no obvious signs of activity. But my ears picked up faint sounds on the wind, the distant baying of hounds, the muffled shouts of men. They were searching. Not just randomly, but with purpose, fanning out from the fortress in organized patterns. They knew I was free, and they were hunting. Worry coiled in my gut, cold and sharp. They wouldn't find us here easily, not yet. This tower was old, forgotten. It scent masked by time and the elements, but they would be thorough. And Gideon, my brother, would likely send his own trackers soon, wolves whose senses were far keener than these human hunters. We couldn't stay here long. This tower was a temporary refuge, not a sanctuary. I returned to the scout's cache, searching for the communication device I remembered. It was there, tucked beneath the rations, an old, smooth crystal shard, cool to the touch. It was an archaic piece of pack magic, designed to send short-coded messages to other linked crystals. Caleb, my loyal beta, carried its twin. I focused my will, pouring a small amount of my alpha energy into the shard. It pulsed with a faint, blue light. Alive. North Tower. Need extraction. Bring guard. The message was brief, coded, hopefully untraceable by Gideon's mages. I sent it out into the ether, praying Caleb was within range, praying he would understand. Sending the message offered a sliver of hope, but it was a distant one. Extraction would take time, perhaps days. Until then, we were on our own. I banked the fire, reducing its smoke, and checked the tower's defenses, the heavy door, the narrow windows. It was a meager protection against determined hunters, let alone Gideon's forces. My gaze fell on Ilara again, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the danger gathering outside. A fierce, almost painful wave of protectiveness washed over me. I had dragged this innocent child into my war. My escape had put her life in mortal danger. I owed her more than just a life debt. I owed her safety. I owed her a future free from the shadows that clung to me. I settled near the door, my body positioned as a final barrier, my senses alert, watching over the sleeping girl who had become the unlikely center of my broken world. Whatever came next, I would face it for her.
Chapter 26. Dawn gave way to a gray, overcast morning. The wind still howled around the old watchtower, a mournful sound that mirrored the unease in my heart. Ilara continued to sleep, her small form barely visible beneath the thick fur blanket. She looked so small, so innocent. It was hard to reconcile this peaceful child with the fierce, determined girl who had sawed through iron chains in a dark cell. Her sleep was a gift, a much-needed recovery from her ordeal. I envied her oblivion. My own senses remained stretched taut, scanning the surrounding forest. The distant baying of hounds had faded, but that brought little comfort. It could mean they had lost the trail, or it could mean they were closing in, moving with greater stealth. I couldn't be sure. The crystal shard remained dark and cool in my hand. No response yet from Caleb. He could be miles away, engaged in pack business, unaware of the message waiting for him. Or worse, Gideon could have anticipated my move, somehow blocking the old magic. Doubt gnawed at me. I checked the small store of rations, barely enough for another day. We needed food, water, and, most importantly, a way out of these mountains before the hunters tightened their net or Gideon's forces arrived. I couldn't risk leaving Ilara alone while I hunted. We were trapped here, reliant on Caleb's uncertain arrival. A soft whimper came from the bundle of fur near the hearth. Ilara was stirring. Her eyes opened, blinking sleepily, then focusing on me with a quiet trust that still felt like a physical blow. She sat up, pushing the heavy blanket away. "Are they dawn?" she whispered, her voice husky with sleep. "Not yet," I admitted, keeping my tone calm, unwilling to frighten her further. "But they haven't found us. We are safe here for now." I offered her the last piece of dried meat and the waterskin. She took them gratefully, eating with the slow, deliberate care of someone used to scarcity. As she ate, her gaze fell upon the faint, silvery scar that marked my wrist where the shackle had burned me. Her own small hand reached out, her fingers gently tracing the mark. It wasn't fully healed, but the angry red inflammation was gone, leaving only the pale, permanent reminder of my captivity. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. Her simple question, her innocent touch resonated deeper than the physical pain. "Not anymore," I replied, my voice rough. The physical wounds would fade, but the betrayal, the agony, the memory of the cage, those scars ran far deeper. And looking at this child, I knew I carried a new scar now, the fierce, unwavering need to protect her from the darkness that defined my world.
Chapter 27. The small fire crackled softly, a tiny island of warmth in the cold stone tower. Ilara finished the last of the dried meat and sipped carefully from the waterskin. She looked small and lost, huddled in the oversized fur blanket, yet her eyes held a quiet resilience that never ceased to amaze me. After her question about my scar, a comfortable silence settled between us, different from the tense quiet of the night before. It was the silence of two people who had faced death together and found an unlikely trust. "Were you always a wolf?" she asked, suddenly, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes wide with childlike curiosity. The question was so innocent, so direct, it caught me off guard. I hesitated. How could I explain the complex reality of my kind to a human child? How could I explain the magic, the shift, the bond between wolf and man without terrifying her? Not always like this, I answered carefully, gesturing to my human form. Deep inside there is a wolf. It is a part of my soul. We are two halves of one being. She seemed to consider this, her brow furrowed. Does your wolf have a name? I almost smiled. No one had ever asked me that. To the pack, the wolf was the alpha. It needed no other name. He does not have a name. He is simply me, and I am him. Was he sad? She asked, her voice drifting back to the scar on my wrist. When the silver hurt you? Her simple question struck a chord deep within me. Sad was too small a word. My wolf had been enraged, agonized, driven to near madness by the constant burning poison and helplessness of the cage. He was, I admitted, my voice rough. He wanted to protect us. The silver, it kept him quiet. Elara reached out again, her small fingers gently touching the scar. Not with pity this time, but with a strange, fierce empathy. He's not quiet now, she whispered, her eyes meeting mine. He's loud, like thunder far away. I stared at her, stunned. She could feel my wolf? Humans couldn't sense that, not unless the connection between us was far stronger, far more primal than just a life debt. The confusing pull I felt, the insistent whisper of mate, could it be possible? Could this small human child be the other half of my soul, the one destined to stand beside the Alpha King? The thought was staggering, impossible, yet it resonated with a deep, undeniable truth.
Chapter 28. The faint blue pulse from the crystal shard was a beacon in the dim watchtower. Caleb was alive. He had the message. He was coming. Relief, sharp and potent, washed through me, but it was immediately tempered by caution. How long would it take him? Hours? Days? And would he arrive before Gideon's forces or the hunters found us? This tower was a temporary shelter, nothing more. My gaze returned to Elara, who was watching the glowing crystal with wide, curious eyes. Her words echoed in my mind. He's not quiet now. I can feel him, like thunder far away. She could sense my wolf, a connection previously unheard of between a shifter and a human. Combined with the undeniable pull I felt towards her, the protective fury she ignited in me, the evidence was mounting towards an impossible conclusion. Mate. Could the fates be so cruel, so kind, as to reveal my destined partner in the form of the small, fragile human child who had saved my life? The implications were staggering. A human Luna? My pack would never understand. Gideon would use it as further proof of my weakness, my unfitness to rule. And Elara, she was just a child. She deserved a life far removed from the brutal politics and ancient blood feuds of my world. Yet, the bond hummed between us, a quiet certainty beneath the surface of chaos. If she was truly my mate, then protecting her wasn't just a matter of debt or honor, it was the most fundamental duty of my soul. Help is coming, I told her softly, tucking the now dark crystal back into my tunic. My most trusted friend. He will get us out of here. Elara nodded, accepting my words with the same quiet faith she had shown me all along. She leaned back against the wall, pulling the fur blanket tighter around her shoulders. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers, and the chill of the stone room was beginning to seep back in. I moved to add more wood to the fire, needing the simple physical task to distract from the whirlwind in my mind. As I worked, Elara's quiet voice broke the silence outside. Will you teach me about wolves? Like your mother taught you about stories? Her innocent request, her desire to understand my world, struck me with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't afraid, she was curious. She saw not a monster, but a different kind of being, one she wanted to comprehend. Before I could answer, a sharp sound cut through the quiet air outside, the distinct snap of a twig. Too loud, too close to be an animal. My head snapped up, my senses instantly on high alert. Someone was out there. The wait was over. Danger had found us.
Chapter 29. The snap of the twig echoed in the sudden, tense silence of the watchtower. My head snapped up, every sense instantly alert. Elara froze, her eyes wide with fear, mirroring my own sudden tension. That sound was too close, too deliberate. It wasn't an animal. Someone was outside, trying to move stealthily but failing. Hunters, most likely. Their arrogance often made them careless. "Quickly," I whispered, urgency sharpening my voice. "Behind the hearth, there's a small space, barely visible." I pointed to a narrow gap between the back of the rough stone fireplace and the tower wall, likely used for storing firewood long ago. It was small, dark, and filled with old soot and cobwebs, but it might offer enough concealment. Elara didn't hesitate. She scrambled from the blanket and squeezed into the narrow opening, pulling the thick fur blanket over the entrance as best she could to obscure it. She disappeared into the shadows just as the first heavy footstep crunched on the loose scree outside the tower door. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had they seen her move? I positioned myself near the center of the small room, deliberately away from Elara's hiding spot, trying to appear as if I were alone. I banked the small fire quickly, kicking dirt over the embers to minimize the light and smoke. The tower plunged into a deeper gloom, lit only by the faint gray light filtering through the arrow slits. I strained my ears, listening. More footsteps now, heavier, crunching purposefully. Definitely humans. At least 2, maybe 3. And they knew I was here. They were coming directly for the door. My wolf snarled silently within me, every muscle coiled, ready to strike. The hunters who had tortured me, who had likely killed my loyal guards, a wave of cold, vengeful fury washed through me. But I forced it down. My priority was Elara. I couldn't risk revealing her. I had to handle this carefully. Draw them in. Neutralize them quickly and quietly, if possible. The heavy, rusted iron door groaned as someone pushed against it from the outside. They weren't trying to be subtle anymore. They knew this was the place. The bar I had wedged back into place after our arrival shuddered under the force. It wouldn't hold long against determined effort. I braced myself, letting my eyes adjust to the near darkness, my body a coiled spring, ready to unleash the fury of an Alpha King cornered. They wanted the beast. They were about to get him. Chapter 30. The heavy iron door shrieked in protest as the bar outside finally gave way under the combined force of the hunters. It slammed open, revealing 3 figures silhouetted against the gray morning light. They were hunters, all right, clad in rough leathers, their faces hard, holding heavy crossbows loaded with silver-tipped bolts. Their eyes scanned the dim interior, quickly adjusting, and found me standing alone in the center of the room. "There he is!" the lead hunter shouted, raising his crossbow. "Cornered beast!" They saw only me. They hadn't detected Elara. Relief warred with the immediate lethal threat. Crossbows were dangerous, even for an Alpha King, especially with silver. I couldn't risk taking a hit, not with Elara so close. I didn't give them time to aim. I exploded into motion, a blur of speed even in human form. I launched myself low, under the trajectory of the first bolt, which thudded harmlessly into the stone wall behind me. I slammed into the lead hunter's legs, taking him down in a tangle of limbs. His crossbow clattered across the floor. The other 2 reacted quickly, firing their bolts. One went wide, ricocheting off the stone hearth. The other grazed my shoulder, a searing line of agony as the silver bit into my flesh. I ignored the pain, rolling clear as I shoved the down hunter towards his companions, disrupting their aim. I was on my feet again in an instant, using the chaos. I grabbed a heavy piece of firewood from the hearth, not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. I met the advance of the 2 remaining hunters, swinging the wood like a club, keeping them off balance, forcing them to defend rather than attack. The silver burn on my shoulder throbbed, a reminder of my vulnerability in this form. Just as one of them lunged, trying to get past my defense, a sound ripped through the air, not from inside the tower, but from outside, a clear, powerful howl. An alpha's howl, but not mine. Caleb. The hunters froze, their faces paling. They recognized the sound. They knew what it meant. Rescue. Pack. They were no longer cornered hunters facing a lone wolf. There were intruders deep in alpha territory, and the pack was coming. Panic flashed in their eyes. They exchanged a desperate glance. Their mission had failed. Survival was now their only goal. One of them turned and bolted, scrambling back out the open door. The other hesitated for only a second before following, abandoning their downed leader. I let them go. My priority wasn't capturing them. It was Ilara. As the sound of the retreating footsteps faded, I turned back to the hearth. Ilara slowly emerged from her hiding spot, her eyes wide, staring at the silver bolt embedded in the wall. She looked at the shallow bleeding wound on my shoulder. Then her gaze met mine. The terror was still there, but beneath it was a profound, unwavering trust. Caleb's howl echoed again, closer this time. Help was here. We had survived. And looking at Ilara, I knew that whatever came next, Gideon, the hunters, reclaiming my throne, we would face it together.